Hello everyone, and welcome to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, your go-to source for fascinating insights into metabolic health and the hidden workings of our cells. I'm Ethan Foster, the observant everyman who can't help but notice the oddities of the human condition, especially when they revolve around diet, fats, and how we somehow manage to demonize butter.
And I'm Alara Skye, the perpetual pursuer of all things witty and wise, armed with a quick mind and an even quicker tongue. Today, we're lifting the lid on one of the biggest nutritional plot twists of the last century: how polyunsaturated fats have quietly taken over our cells. Think of it as a microscopic coup d'etat, except the tyrants are these sneaky fats.
Tyrants in our own body? I can already see the headlines. Polyunsaturated fats rise to power. Citizens protest with forks and knives. In all seriousness, it seems we've moved pretty far from the times of our great-great-grandparents, who apparently had more saturated fat in their systems than a slab of well-marbled beef.
Right? 100 years ago, most folks ate foods teeming with stable, robust, saturated fats. Now we live in an era where polyunsaturated fats have marched into our diets and bunkered down in our adipose tissue. And ironically, many of us are still pointing fingers at saturated fat as the villain. It's like blaming the quiet neighbor for the loud party next door.
Precisely. And the numbers tell quite a story. There's research showing a 136% increase in linoleic acid, the main PUFA, in our adipose tissue over the last 50 years. That's like telling your body, we're going to build up a brand new super inflamed metropolis right here in your cells. Enjoy.
And once that metropolis of linoleic acid is established, it doesn't pack up and leave without a fight. This stuff has a half-life of around 680 days in stored body fat, meaning if you've been a consistent consumer of high PUFA oils, hello soybean, corn, and friends, these molecules can linger for years. That's like signing a 2-year lease on a questionable apartment.
When you put it that way, it sounds even less appealing. But let's clarify something. Polyunsaturated fats aren't called polyunsaturated because they have multiple minivans in their driveways. They're labeled that way because their chemical structure has multiple double bonds, and these double bonds are quite fragile.
In the chemistry world, fragile is code for easily oxidized. So these polyunsaturated fats can undergo oxidation like they're auditioning for a meltdown scene in a drama. You've got enzymatic oxidation, where polyunsaturated fats get converted into inflammatory molecules, and non-enzymatic oxidation, where free radicals go on the attack, spawning toxic byproducts like 4-HNE and MDA.
Which is basically the cellular equivalent of having rowdy teenagers trash your living room, right? Everything gets damaged and inflamed, and in the end, you're left picking up the pieces.
Exactly. And all that intracellular chaos can push you toward metabolic dysfunction. When your cells are spending all their energy dealing with oxidative damage, they don't exactly excel at sustaining a thriving metabolic rate.
So it's not just about what happens after one enormous serving of French fries. It's about the long-term deposit of these fats into our actual body composition. And apparently, the shift from saturated to unsaturated isn't just a footnote in the nutritional story. It's changed the entire narrative of human health.
That's right. We used to be saturated fat-based life forms, kind of like the classic heroes in a vintage movie. But now we've transformed into these PUFA-rich beings who might think we're living a health revolution while ironically fueling more oxidative stress.
The good news is that there's a hero making a cameo in our story. It's called C15-0, an odd-chain saturated fatty acid found in grass-fed dairy and ruminant animal fat. And if you're wondering, wait, an odd chain? Does that mean it's the quirky cousin at the family reunion? You're not too far off.
Let's give credit where it's due. C15-0 is basically like a well-armed guard for our cells. It strengthens cell membranes, lowers inflammation, and can protect against that lovely oxidative damage we just complained about. But here's the kicker. Our bodies can't produce enough of it on their own.
So we can't just do some fancy metabolic backflip and conjure up C15-0 out of thin air. We rely on our diet for it. That means you have to actually consume foods that contain it, like dairy from grass-fed sources.
Yes. And believe it or not, modern agricultural practices have meddled with the C15-0 content of dairy too. Grain-fed cows produce dairy that's lower in this beneficial fatty acid, so it's not just about grabbing any old block of cheese. We're talking grass-fed, old-school dairy for the real deal.
It's almost as if the further we drift from traditional farming and diets, the more we end up sacrificing nutrients that used to be abundant. It makes me think about our poor ancestors who had to churn butter by hand, but at least they got all that natural C15-0. Meanwhile, we get butter from a plastic tub.
And then we wonder why our cells feel underpaid and overworked. C15-0 is crucial for maintaining stable cell membranes, sort of like installing top-notch insulation in your house so the temperature stays comfortable and you don't get random water damage.
On top of that, C15-0 helps reduce inflammation, repair mitochondrial function, and even improve gut microbiome diversity. So it's not a one-trick pony, it's more like the Swiss Army knife of saturated fats.
Precisely. And that's what makes it the perfect counterbalance to the onslaught of polyunsaturated fats. Think of C15-0 as the reliable friend who shows up to help you move apartments when everyone else has suddenly gone silent. It's that vital.
So, let's talk about the benefits of reducing dietary PUFA intake and upping the saturated fats from quality sources. First, if you cut back on polyunsaturated fats, you reduce oxidative stress. That means fewer opportunities for free radicals to stage their nightly rave inside your cells.
And keep in mind that 680-day half-life. That's a long goodbye. So you want to give your body a fighting chance to gradually oxidize and metabolize the polyunsaturated fats you've stored over the years. In other words, it's a steady, consistent effort, like saving for retirement, only with your cells.
Exactly. You can't wave a magic wand and instantly swap out all those stored polyunsaturated fats. It's going to take a concerted effort for your system to burn through the ones you already have. Meanwhile, you stay on top of your daily diet choices, so you're not reintroducing more.
And that's why it's a good idea to consciously limit foods with high PUFA content, like vegetable oils. Because every time we saute onions in soybean oil, we're basically telling our cells, yes, sign me up for more oxidative tension. Not really the best plan if you're trying to age gracefully.
Especially when you consider that, just by switching to grass-fed butter or ghee, you can get not only stable saturated fats, but also a bit of that star nutrient, C15-0. That's a 2-for-1 benefit. Fewer polyunsaturated fats, plus more protective saturated fat.
Now, an important question arises. How do we seamlessly integrate grass-fed dairy? Because I know some people might ask, should I just eat a wheel of cheddar and call it a day? Probably not ideal. But switching from plant-based margarine to grass-fed butter, choosing full-fat grass-fed dairy, or even sampling grass-fed cheese can be a step in the right direction.
And let's not forget about cooking. Trade out those highly processed vegetable oils for tallow or ghee. If you want to get fancy, maybe roast your veggies in a bit of grass-fed beef fat. Your future self might just thank you for that added layer of metabolic fortification.
Or if you're feeling especially ambitious, you could track down some grass-fed dairy farms near you, sample their products, and pretend you're on a health quest that's also an epic culinary adventure. Bonus points if you churn your own butter at least once, just to appreciate how many wrist muscles are involved.
I like that challenge. Live the old school life for a day and see if you can handle the churn. But let's circle back to the bigger issue. All these shifts in our fat composition haven't happened overnight, so reversing them will take time and consistency.
Which means avoiding that sense of urgency or frustration if you don't see dramatic changes after a couple of weeks. Remember, if it takes roughly 2 years for your stored linoleic acid to drop to a healthier level, you can't measure your progress in days.
And in those 2 years, your metabolism can gradually rebalance, your inflammation markers could improve, and your body may return to a state more akin to what our ancestors experienced. You know, those people who likely ate grass-fed cheese without tweeting about it.
The big takeaway here is that our dietary fats really shape us, literally. We often hear, you are what you eat, but we rarely dwell on how that directly applies to our internal fat composition. Yet that's exactly what's going on. Our body fat reflects our dietary fat intake.
So if you've been on a mission to reduce your reliance on heavily processed oils, or if you're simply curious about how to protect your cells from self-destruction, the main message is, reduce those polyunsaturated fats, embrace quality saturated fats, and let time do its magic.
And let's not forget about the importance of that elusive, odd-chain fatty acid, C15-0. The more we learn about it, the more we see how crucial it is for cellular health, especially when we're under assault by the polyunsaturated masses.
Now, some folks might say, but wait, isn't saturated fat bad? Didn't we learn that in the 1980s? It's reminiscent of an old record that's been playing the same tune over and over, except the lyrics have been updated with new science.
Yes, the message has evolved. While certain saturated fats still get the side eye in mainstream health circles, the emerging research on C15-0 is opening a fresh perspective. Instead of tarring and feathering all saturated fats together, we're starting to parse out the good, the not so good, and the definitely beneficial.
It's almost like rewriting a detective story. We thought we had the culprit pegged, saturated fat, did it in the kitchen with the frying pan, but new evidence is pointing us in a different direction. Maybe the real culprit was an overdose of unstable polyunsaturated fats all along.
Who knew nutrition could be so dramatic? But I guess that's what happens when we rely on oversimplified headlines and misguided guidelines. It takes a while for the dust to settle and for more nuanced science to reach the mainstream.
In the meantime, we can reflect on what we've learned. Polyunsaturated fats, especially linoleic acid, are widely prevalent in our diet. They're building up in our adipose tissue like it's prime real estate, and they're not doing our health any favors if they're present in excess.
Correct. And let's not overlook that these changes in our body's fat composition correlate with modern health challenges. Inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, heart health woes, all can tie back, at least in part, to the infiltration of unstable fats.
So the solution? Shift away from the foods that load us up with polyunsaturated fats, stock up on stable fats, and make sure we're getting enough C15-0. Eventually, we'll see a shift back to the kind of internal environment that fosters healthier mitochondria, calmer inflammatory processes, and a more robust metabolic rate.
Precisely. It's not that you can never have any PUFA-rich foods. The goal is moderation and awareness. If you're using a specific oil every day or loading up on snack foods high in vegetable oils, you might want to do a rethink.
And every step you take in reducing polyunsaturated fats and including more stable fats is an investment in your future metabolic health. Think of it as a cellular 401k. You might not notice the difference immediately, but over time, your cells will thank you, maybe even with less inflammation and more energy.
And with that, we've reached the core message of Dr. Mercola's cellular wisdom for today. Your fat composition is not written in stone. It's a living, breathing reflection of the fats you choose to eat. If you're not happy with how polyunsaturated fats have redecorated your cells, you have the power to redecorate back.
I like the idea of redecorating my cells. Maybe add some classy wallpaper, toss out the broken furniture, and invite C15-0 in for tea. Although, in practice, that means fewer processed oils and more grass-fed butter.
That's the real interior design plan. And it'll take time, but it's worth it if you value metabolic stability and a lower inflammatory burden. It's like reversing a century's worth of questionable design choices in your body's house. A tall order, but hey, we have to start somewhere.
Indeed. So that's our deep dive into the world of polyunsaturated fats, saturated fats, and C15-0, all woven together by the ongoing health narrative we're uncovering. We hope we've demystified some myths and sparked some fresh inspiration for your dietary choices.
And remember, when it comes to your body's internal environment, consistency is key. It might not be glamorous to talk about long half-lives and incremental changes, but that's what real health transformation often looks like. Small steps taken day after day.
Thank you for joining us on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. We hope you found this conversation equal parts enlightening and entertaining. Keep pondering the mysteries of your metabolism, because there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. Here's to giving our cells the saturated stability they deserve and nudging those pesky polyunsaturated fats to pack their bags. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating foray into the wonders of the human body.
Until then, take care of those microscopic kingdoms inside you. After all, they're working round the clock, even as we speak, and they'll be there for the long haul, especially if we give them a helping hand.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for listening, everyone. And remember, there's no time like the present to start on the path toward better metabolic health and stronger cell membranes.
See you soon, and don't forget, the next time you shop, maybe think twice about that vegetable oil aisle. Your cells just might breathe a sigh of relief.
They will indeed. Until next time, everyone, keep those cells happy and well-fed with the right kind of fats. You'll thank yourself later.
And that's a wrap for Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with more conversations that shine a light on the mysteries of your metabolic world.
Bye for now, friends. Keep your odd-chain saturated fats close and your polyunsaturated fats, well, let's just say on a short leash. Cheers to better health.